It's pretty childish.
Should you do intuitive eating? That's the question I'm answering in today's video. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kevin, and here at The Rational Eater, I am making eating disorder recovery simple. If you want to overcome binge eating, bulimia, or chewing and spitting, then check out the links in the box below. And if you want to speak with me directly, there is also a link below. Today I am responding to a video by the Unnatural Vegan about intuitive eating. If you haven't been following the Unnatural Vegan, you should. She makes a lot of good videos and she has a lot of unconventional opinions. Her real name is Swayze, I think, so if I refer to Swayze, I'm referring to the creator, Unnatural Vegan. Intuitive eating has become its own movement. It started when two dietitians, Tribble and Resch, published a book called Intuitive Eating in the mid-90s, I think 1995. They were the OGs of intuitive eating, and now it has blossomed into this entire movement of coaches and nutritionists and dietitians who teach their clients how to eat intuitively. If you don't know what intuitive eating is, you probably shouldn't be watching this video because I'm not really going to explain it. Or you can watch the Unnatural Vegan's video and then come back here. So grab your favorite forbidden food. Let's talk about intuitive eating. Here's the Unnatural Vegan.
So a lot of this sounds appealing to me, most of it does, and I think most people would say the same. I
want to say this first. None of the principles of intuitive eating are bad. I don't object to them. It's not the principles that I have a problem with, well, maybe a couple of them. But my problem with intuitive eating is it's become this anti-diet, anti-weight loss movement. And they also use a lot of words without ever defining them. But the principles are really sensible. Who can argue with them? Honor your hunger, body respect, exercise for health, not necessarily weight loss.
Restricting foods is why we end up having cravings and feeling out of control when it comes to foods. This is according to intuitive eaters.
What is restriction? This is a word that bothers me because it's not either or. It is a range. It is a spectrum. If I only eat donuts once a month, is that restriction? If I only eat my favorite foods once in a while, is that restriction? For example, I only eat chocolate chip cookies when my mother makes them twice a year. That means I get chocolate chip cookies twice a year. She makes me a bag of them and I enjoy them. Does that mean I am restricting chocolate chip cookies? Does that mean that I will eventually binge on them because I don't eat them enough? If you really like muffins, for example, and you only have them once a week, is that restriction? Once a month? Once a year? At what point does it become restriction? This is one of those words that the movement uses a lot, but they never define.
That doesn't really mean a whole lot. Looking at each study one by one really doesn't tell us a whole lot. There are very few randomized trials,
I'm so glad Swayze did the research on intuitive eating. I don't really have the time or the patience to do it, but it looks like most of these studies have a small number of subjects. They're not randomized controlled trials, they're cross-sectional studies. You don't need to understand what that is, but it's just a different grade of research. My complaint about most of the research is that it is done on one segment of society, which is middle-aged Caucasian females. That means we can't necessarily take those results and apply it to other segments of the population, like middle-aged white males, or any other segment of the population. I think that segment of the population responds best to intuitive eating. And I'll say this, a lot of people have done well with intuitive eating. They have gotten results with it. I cannot deny that. And if you've gotten results with intuitive eating, great.
Again, the meta-analysis I already mentioned found no significant difference when compared to dieting.
But when they do research on this, they don't get really phenomenal results. When you look at a meta-analysis, it doesn't show any difference between conventional weight loss therapy. And I know the goal of intuitive eating is not necessarily to lose weight, but if you normalize your behaviors and you adopt new beliefs and you stop binging on the weekends and you stop yo-yo dieting, you should see some weight loss. And we'll talk about set point in a little bit. But they don't find any more weight loss than conventional weight loss methods.
They aren't putting overweight people on intuitive eating and finding that they lose more weight than people following, a conventional diet.
How else could we measure success with intuitive eating? You could take 100 chronic dieters and put them in a group and teach them intuitive eating principles. And then you could take 100 other chronic dieters and teach them about nutrition and weight loss and all that. And then after a year, look at their behaviors. If intuitive eating works, they should have fewer episodes of overeating and binge eating and restricting, however they define that. But as far as I know, we don't have that study yet. You would think after a quarter of a century, we would have a really well done randomized controlled trial comparing the two groups, but we don't.
Finding that people who already eat intuitively have lower BMI does not support the notion that teaching overweight people how to eat intuitively will result in weight loss. They are two completely different things.
Swayze is in dangerous territory here because she's talking about BMI. Yeah, BMI, body mass index. Nothing pisses off intuitive eaters more than talking about BMI. I don't know why. Yes, it is a very crude measurement. It doesn't tell you a lot about your health. It is just a simple way to gauge somebody's size. When I get a report, like a patient report, and I see BMI, it doesn't tell me much. It's not going to change my plan of care, but it just gives me an idea of how big this patient is. And having a BMI of 27 versus 24 doesn't really increase your mortality. I will concede that point. But when you start getting into the 30s and up to 40, mortality does become an issue. It's at the extremes that BMI really matters. But if you have a dad bod or if you have some rolls on your stomach, is that indicative of increased mortality? Probably not. But I have heard so many intuitive eaters and dietitians just go on and on about the BMI and the history of it and BMI this and BMI that. Yes, we get it.
It's kind of disappointing. Another thing that I see as a problem with the intuitive eating movement is how dieting is talked about. Dieting, calorie counting, restricting food, weighing yourself, all that sort of stuff.
She's right. Intuitive eating does read like a diet book. It makes all of these promises. If you follow the principles and you practice them, you will arrive at your set point weight. Your cravings will go away. You'll see chocolate like you see peaches. When you stop restricting and when you don't have forbidden foods, you won't be tempted to overeat them, and you'll have this wonderful relationship with food. It is very idealistic. But every diet makes that same claim. You will lose weight, you will be healthy, you'll have a good relationship with food, you will not have cravings for junk food anymore, you'll have health and vitality. And intuitive eating, the anti-diet book, kind of reads the same way.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't people who diet, lose the weight, and keep it off for years.
She weighs herself, I weigh myself. I weigh myself once or twice a week. It's okay. I know it's a number, I know what it means. It doesn't make or break my day. I don't weigh myself multiple times a day. I don't pack it in my suitcase anymore. Some people take the scales to the extreme. I get that, but it is one tool of many to measure your weight. And I'm a big fan of keeping your finger on the pulse, okay? There are multiple ways to make sure that you are in good health, and the scale is one way. It's in your bathroom, you press a button, you stand on it. It's very simple. But the intuitive eating movement hates scales and numbers. It's one of my biggest complaints about them. Weight loss is possible. I've pointed this out in a previous video. You can lose weight and keep it off. That's why we have the National Weight Loss Registry, at least here in the States. And it includes tens of thousands of people who have lost weight and kept it off. If you have the right reasons, you have a realistic time frame, and you don't severely cut your calories, you will lose weight and you will keep it off. I did it, you can do it too. And let's talk about the word dieting here. This is another word that the movement likes to use. Dieting. What is dieting? There is a difference between aggressive dieting and intentional weight loss. Intentional weight loss is, I need to lose some weight. How do I do that? You cut out processed food. You cut out really palatable food. You cut out foods that have a lot of added sugar and flour and industrial vegetable oils. If that's all you did, you would probably lose weight. When I stopped binge eating, I lost weight. And I didn't have to try very hard. I didn't have to restrict. I didn't have to diet. I just stopped eating the binge foods. I stopped having episodes. And when I did that, my weight went down. This isn't rocket science. And I hate it how they say dieting is bad and 95% of diets fail. And this just is objectively false. That's not a fact, it's propaganda. Losing weight is not that hard. And a lot of times it's necessary. A lot of people have lost weight and they're healthier for it. My point is there is a difference between dieting and intentional weight loss. And it's like the intuitive eating movement doesn't want anybody to lose weight intentionally. They'll talk about diet culture. Oh, you should ignore diet culture. You don't really want to lose weight. You're just losing weight because diet culture told you to do it. This is gaslighting. Telling somebody that they only want to lose weight because diet culture is telling them to lose weight is dishonest. A lot of people have good motives for losing weight. Others don't, but many do. I didn't have to diet to lose weight after I overcame binge eating. I didn't. I didn't have to go on this really restrictive diet. I didn't do a liquid diet. I ate the same boring foods day in, day out. I had a protein shake, a protein bar, bread, quinoa, sweet potatoes. I'll admit it was kind of low fat, but it wasn't forever. It was consistent, it was predictable, it wasn't very exciting. I certainly didn't have my old binge foods, so I guess I was restricting too. But it worked, and it was satisfying, and it gave me the energy I needed to get through the day. And over time, I lost all that weight that I gained through binge eating. And you know what? I'm better off.
What about those of us who have some rules? Maybe we keep certain foods out of the house because we just,
Having rules is okay. I don't like to eat before 10. I don't like to eat after 7. Is that disordered? I don't like to eat at airports because there's nothing good there. I eat wedding cake at weddings. I eat birthday cake only at birthday parties. There are some foods I only eat on certain occasions. Is that okay? It's okay to have rules and boundaries. There's nothing wrong with that. But to the intuitive eating movement, it's like cravings are everything. If you have a craving for something and you feel like eating something, you should just have it, because if you don't have it now, then you'll binge on it later. And let's talk about set point. Set point is real. I think it's well established that your body has a thermostat, like a fat thermostat. But it works both ways. If you're a chronic dieter, you're below your set point and your body is going to fight to get to that set point. But if you are overweight and you have a lot of excess body fat and your set point is down here, you should take measures to correct that. But intuitive eating only recognizes set point when you're below that. It's like if you're above your set point, you shouldn't take any measures to get back to your set point. Or if you're really large, then you must be at your set point. No, what if you're well above your set point? Should you not take measures to lose weight to get to your set point? The other thing too is that set point can change over time. However, if you go on a very boring, consistent diet like me, you can lower that set point. That's one reason I love my boring diet. It makes it very easy to maintain my weight, it lowers my set point, I don't have a lot of cravings, and I don't have any compulsion to overeat. When you don't eat a lot of really tasty food, you never really want to overeat. Who wants to overeat stuff like black beans?
just have faith in the process. Have faith that at some point you'll lose the weight.
It does take a certain level of faith, doesn't it? When you first start, you have all of these cravings, you're overeating, you're eating a lot, and you're gaining weight, and you're just assuming that these cravings will dissipate over time, that your weight will stabilize. But what if it doesn't? Then what? I made a video a couple weeks ago about a young woman who did this and she gained 30 kilograms and she hasn't taken off any of that weight.
But that can take a very long time. Time that's been spent eating lots of processed foods, gaining weight, possibly raising your set point.
So you're spending all this time trying to learn the principles of intuitive eating. Meanwhile, the weight is going up and you're consuming all of this junk food. At what point do you quit? Or do you keep going and trust the process?
Would make a lot more sense to me if we lived in a very different environment. If we were surrounded only by whole, unprocessed, bland foods.
Intuitive eating would work if food were scarce and the only food we had was really boring. But we don't live in that environment. We have vending machines, we have 24/7 grocery stores, we have apps like Grubhub and DoorDash and Uber Eats, and they'll deliver the food to your home. We have drive-through windows 24/7. We have new flavors, we have advertisements, not to mention the stress, the anxiety, the convenience, the speed of life. We don't live in that environment anymore. We don't live in 1800. I suppose 150 years ago, when food was hard to get and you really had to work for it and you were working all the time, intuitive eating would work, and that's probably why it did work. People didn't count anything back then. They didn't have to. People didn't really care about long-term health. People didn't care about their physique. People didn't care about setting a new PR. We should be very fortunate that we live in a time when we can have weight loss goals, when we can have fitness goals, when we can have diet goals. That's a very cool thing. It's very unique in history. But intuitive eating thinks, oh, this is horrible. You shouldn't count anything. You shouldn't track anything. The point is, if you live in this environment and you follow your cravings, you're not going to get a good result. I'll give you an example. A lot of people left Japan after the war and moved to the States, and they adopted a Western diet. Flour, sugar, vegetable oils, and they developed all sorts of chronic diseases. They abandoned their traditional Japanese diet, which is very healthy, and they adopted the Western diet. They didn't have a history of dieting, they didn't know what forbidden foods were, but they also didn't know anything about nutrition. And they just ate what was available. They were going off their intuition, and it didn't end well for them. Same with the Pima Indians in Mexico. When the US government put them on reservations, they gave them a bunch of Western food with a lot of flour and sugar. And what happened to the Pima Indians? Obesity rates skyrocketed. They were eating what was available to them. They weren't dieting. They didn't have forbidden foods. They didn't need to make peace with food. Here's what you're gonna eat, and they ate it, and they ended up obese. My point is, you have to understand the basics of nutrition in the modern world. You need to understand macronutrients and caloric density and the basics of metabolic rate. You don't have to be a dietitian, but you do need to understand the basics. It's just a basic skill.
Researchers have an umbrella term for this combination of effects on the brain.
Food reward is a huge problem with intuitive eating. Intuitive eating assumes that people only eat for emotional reasons, and they certainly do eat for emotional reasons, but a lot of times people eat high-calorie foods because it tastes good, because it's fun, it provides pleasure. We're constantly trying to alter our consciousness. That's why people drink wine and watch funny TV shows and call their friends and spend time with people they like and eat chocolate, because it alters their mental state. And we live in a world where it is very easy to find hyper-palatable foods. Our brains aren't used to it. This is new.
Eating something healthier because I know the cake isn't going to satisfy me, it's not going to fill me up, it doesn't remove the desire for cake.
Giving yourself permission to eat really palatable food doesn't mean you're going to binge on it, but it doesn't mean that those cravings will disappear. I never got sick of binge eating. I never got sick of eating at night. It was always fun. It was always pleasurable. It was always a nice escape. But at some point I had to say, this is not what I want anymore. But I didn't stop because the cravings disappeared, because the desire disappeared. The desire disappeared over time when I created new goals for myself, and I started behaving differently, and I started to make decisions based on my long-term goals. That's when the desire disappeared. But if I had a donut right now, it would taste great. I would derive a lot of pleasure from that. But I don't want the donut because I don't want all that oil, sugar, and flour in my body. Intuitive eating ignores the power of reinforcement and habit, and also the beliefs that we have about certain foods. When you believe that it will provide pleasure, it will sedate you, it will make you feel better, you're going to pursue it. As Swayze says, the desire doesn't just disappear when you consume it more. The desire to binge eat won't disappear just because you keep binging. The desire will only go away when you start making different decisions and you start adopting different beliefs.
Obviously so silly. It's like saying the only reason alcoholics exist is because they tried to deprive themselves of alcohol.
I really like the alcohol analogy here. You would never tell an alcoholic that the reason he's consuming alcohol is because he's made it a forbidden drink, or he just needs to follow his cravings, or he needs to give himself unlimited permission to drink alcohol. Nobody would ever say that. Alcoholics drink alcohol because of habit and because they have certain beliefs about the alcohol. They think that the alcohol is the only way to get through life. It has become a cope for them. It has become the one thing that they really enjoy. Alcoholics drink alcohol because they think that the alcohol will solve a problem. They believe that it will provide some effect. It's the one thing they have. It's their escape. It's their cope. They're not drinking it because they think tomorrow they won't have it anymore. There were plenty of times I binged on junk food and I knew I was going to get it the next day and the next week. It wasn't a last supper. I binged because it made me feel good. It was an escape. It was a nice distraction. It was pleasurable. I wasn't binging on Chipotle and ice cream because it was forbidden. But I used binge eating as a cope. It was a nice escape. It was pleasurable. I had positive feelings about it. I had positive expectations about it. It became a habit. Once I did it once, my brain learned that it felt good and it compelled me to do it again. This is what intuitive eating ignores. It ignores reinforcement and habit. We don't necessarily binge on things because it was on a forbidden foods list. We pursue it because we have certain expectations about that food or about that substance. People eat chocolate because it feels good, not because it was a forbidden food. There were a few times in my binge eating bulimia journey when I ate something because I thought it was going to be the last time I got it. I had this really black and white thinking about things, and that's where intuitive eating can help. But most of the time I knew that wasn't going to be the last time I had it. I knew I was going to have it tomorrow, next week, next month, and I kept eating it. Food reward is a huge hole in intuitive eating. It assumes that people eat things purely for emotional reasons, or purely because they haven't had it in over 2 months, or because they've been prepping for a show, or because they've been on some restricted diet. No. People will eat really palatable foods because they taste good.
I just don't buy that all junk food's the same, essentially. Clearly it's not. Clearly sweet and savory stuff, it goes back and forth, and there are a million different junk foods. And
one of my favorite binges was a Chipotle vegetarian burrito, full size, and ice cream after that. There was starch and salt in the burrito, and then there was sugar in the ice cream. It was a wonderful combination. It wasn't very healthy, but I had that so many times, and it doesn't really bring back good memories. But I'm just saying, they're savory and then they're sweet. And if you get sick of one thing, you can find another thing. I would eat lemon Oreos, and then I would find white chocolate macadamia cookies, one of my favorite. And then I would find a different type of cookie. You can never completely satisfy a craving. You will always find something to binge on. Binge eating and overeating and snacking will never get old. They will always feel good. Cravings come and go. They're ephemeral. They're not a good guide for what you need. They don't necessarily indicate a need. They indicate a want. I get cravings for all sorts of crap. I get cravings for naughty websites. I get cravings for email. I get cravings for social media. I get cravings for Sonic Blast. I get cravings for all sorts of stuff. I don't necessarily follow them. Why? Because now I am connected to my long-term goals. I want to do things that the me of tomorrow will thank me for.
It's pretty childish.
So when Swayze says it's childish, she's talking about wasting food. That's a different part of the video. But sometimes you have to say no to the child in your brain. Sometimes you have to say no to the chocolate chip cookies. Sometimes you have to say no to the things that you want. It's just part of being an adult.
I don't really see how you can really follow intuitive eating and be vegan.
So no, you cannot be vegan and intuitive, and that's okay. When you're vegan, you say no to dairy and milkshakes and steaks and burgers. Listen, there's a lot of animal products that I really enjoy. A well-cooked steak, it's delicious. A burger, it's delicious. I'm not full vegan, so I have those once in a while, but not habitually. Am I restricting that because I don't want to eat it because I don't trust the quality of the meat? I don't want to support that industry? No, but it's definitely not intuitive. I overcome my natural inclination and I apply knowledge and values to make a decision. Overcoming natural hunger cues is okay. In her case, she needs to eat earlier so she doesn't screw up her sleep cycle later. I like to do intermittent fasting. I like a 7 to 8 hour window. So if I get hungry at 8:30, I don't eat until 10 or 10:30. Is that really unhealthy? I don't think so. Narrowing your feeding window in the pursuit of health, is that dangerous or unhealthy? As far as I know, it's not. But what I'm saying is you have to combine long-term goals like health with short-term goals like satisfying your hunger.
Look, there's a reason that number 10 exists, and that's because we have to say no to ourselves at least sometimes. We're not always going to want healthy foods. Hyper-palatable foods are objectively tastier.
Right, it's not intuition, it's a choice. We don't make decisions purely on intuition. We combine our values, our long-term goals, knowledge, data. We combine a lot of things. We do a very simple cost-benefit analysis, at least you should. You can't pretend like you don't understand nutrition. You can't pretend that you don't know macronutrients. You can't pretend to not know something. For example, I know that trans fats are really unhealthy. They damage your arteries. They're not good for you. But I like a lot of things with trans fats. My favorite tortillas have trans fats. But you know what? I said no to those. A lot of things I like have trans fats, but I don't eat them because I took that knowledge about trans fats and I use that knowledge to make a better decision about what I eat. Another example is oats. I have started eating organic steel-cut oats because they don't have as much glyphosate or any glyphosate. Glyphosate is a chemical that they use to grow crops, and there's a large concentration of them in oats, and so I took that knowledge and I applied it. It's like, hey, I'm gonna make a different decision from now on.
Or maybe there's a middle ground, why can't we kind of mesh intuitive eating with dieting.
That's what I call rational eating. You combine your values, your intuition, data, knowledge to come to a logical conclusion about what you should eat. You should consider cravings, but I think that's only one part of the equation. You need to consider everything else. Is this really going to serve me? Is it going to satiate my appetite? Is it healthy? Do I want all this sugar and flour in my system? Is one piece of cake going to kill me? No, it's not, but it's not going to help me either. And how much pleasure do I want today versus long-term health? We're always making that calculation. And sometimes you have to say no. Saying no to things that you want is just a part of life. It is part of being an adult. Avoiding hyperpalatable foods was one of the best things I did in my recovery. I still don't eat a lot of my former binge foods, and I've explained why in a previous video, but they help me maintain my weight, they lower my set point. When I don't eat hyperpalatable foods, I don't overconsume anything. They're not healthy anyway. You shouldn't be eating a lot of industrial vegetable oils or flour or sugar anyway. You can't ignore science. We know that sugar, flour, and vegetable oils are not really good for you. If you go solely off intuition and what feels good and what appeals to you, you're not going to get great results. Again, intuitive eating would work great in a scarce environment where the only things that were available were whole natural foods, and there were no grocery stores and no vending machines and no fast food restaurants and no apps, and it was really hard to obtain food. You use your intuition, but you combine that with data. But your intuition is only as good as the data that you provided. And when I mean data, that means your own personal experiences and your knowledge about nutrition and about health. Health culture is not a bad thing. We're constantly learning new things. We're constantly learning how the body works and how food interacts with the body. We're constantly updating what we already know. There's always new information. I'm not saying you should completely overhaul your diet all the time, but you need to be learning about this stuff. We live in the age of abundance, which is a good thing, but there's also a negative side to that. And the negative side is a lot of the things that they produce are not really good for you. I'm not saying you should take a course in nutrition or read a nutrition textbook, but you need to understand the basics. Macronutrients, calorie density, organic versus non-organic, the major food groups. Food reward, that's another good concept to know. If you just understand the basics, you can start making better decisions about what you eat. People who are ignorant about nutrition are usually not very healthy. You have to combine your feelings, your cravings, your experiences, plus your values. What are your values? If you value long-term health, you have to consider that too when you decide what to eat. And then when you learn new information, you have to apply that information to what you eat. I provided you the example of trans fat and glyphosate. Those are my thoughts on intuitive eating. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my links in the box below. And if you want to speak with me directly, there is also a link in the box. If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like one of the other videos that you see on the screen. Click one of them and I'll see you there. And as always, eat the way you're designed to.